Love Your Neighbor, written by Melody Carlson. Love your neighbor. Here we are at the title page, and it says written by Melody Carlson. And we know that author writes the story, author writes the story, author writes the story. That's why she came first. Illustrations by Susan Reagan. And we know that illustrators illustrate, illustrators illustrate, illustrators illustrate, which means she made the pictures for Love Your Neighbor. I live in a house on Daffodil Lane where the kid next door is really a pain. Tim borrowed my bike and he bent the front wheel. Then he said to me, "Hey, no big deal." As if that's not enough, he frightened my cat by swinging a big wooden baseball bat. Just by an inch, he missed Tabby's head. But what scared me the most is what Grandma said. I complained to my grandma about this weird kid. I told her in detail of all that he did. She listened and smiled and nodded her head, but I almost croaked when I heard what she said. She took down her Bible from up on her shelf and read, "Love your neighbor as you love yourself." I said to my grandma, "You've never met Tim. I'd gladly love anyone, but I can't love him." I waved bye to Grandma and went on my way. I hoped to forget all she had to say. Loving your neighbor may sound sweet and good, but not if your neighbor's named Timothy Wood. I wished I could move to an igloo somewhere where my next door neighbor's a big polar bear. I'd gladly invite the fine fellow for tea. He could sit by my fire and watch my TV. We could play checkers and police and crooks. Why, I'd even loan him my favorite books. To be a good neighbor, I'd surely love him. But please, don't you tell me I gotta love Tim. And what if I lived far away in a jungle? In loving my neighbor, I'd surely not bungle. Even if bunches of wild chimpanzees lived right next door, way up high in the trees, I'd let them go first when we swung on the vine. If they ate my bananas, I'd say, "Hey, that's fine." For monkeys don't know what good manners are for. And they couldn't be worse than Tim Wood is next door. Or what if I lived on a boat with a sail where my closest neighbor's a great big blue whale? I'd be just as good and nice as could be. I'd sure love my neighbor and hope he loved me. And what if the place that I called my home was the very same place that the elephants roam? I'd cut lots of grass and invite them to lunch. In the lake, I'd pour Kool-Aid to make purple punch. And if they forgot to say thank you or please, or didn't say bless you if somebody sneezed, I wouldn't worry. I'd say that's all right. We'd be friendly neighbors, and we'd never fight. Or what if I wandered up north on the loose, where my nearest neighbor's a long-legged moose? To be a good neighbor, I'd cook a fine meal of moose-friendly food. Not such a big deal. And even if 54 moose friends came too, I wouldn't be mad or make a to-do, because he's my neighbor. I'd be nice to him, and ever so grateful he's nothing like Tim. I sat on my front porch and dreamed what I'd do if I lived in a cave or a big city zoo. And all I imagined, no matter how grim, seemed pretty good, compared to old Tim. Then I heard an odd noise, and I glanced at Tim's place, and there sat my neighbor with tears on his face. I watched in surprise, and then I felt bad. I wonder what made my neighbor feel so sad. I stood and I waved and I called out, "Hello!" Then got off my porch and walked over real slow. "What's up?" I asked. "Is the world going to end?" He frowned, then replied, "I don't have one friend." I swallowed real hard and looked down at my shoes. I pondered, then wondered what I had to lose. He wasn't an elephant, moose, or a whale. He couldn't leave trees or swing by his tail. Then, all of a sudden, I wanted to see if I could love Tim in the same way I love me. I wasn't real sure about what he would think. He might laugh out loud or make a big stink. "Well, Tim," I began, "I'd like to be friends and get along better and make some amends." His eyes lit up as he said, "That's cool." And that's when I learned the golden rule. Now, most of the time, Tim and I have a blast, and I think that our friendship is one that will last. But sometimes we battle and both get defeated. That's when I remember how I like to be treated. And even on days when we just can't agree, I try to love Tim the same way I love me. And I keep these words in my heart and my head. Love your neighbor as yourself, just like Jesus said. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Matthew 22:39. The end. Love your neighbor.